Hello, everybody, and welcome. We will start the webinar in just a few minutes. But if you would go over to the chat, I would love to hear where you are joining us from and, what your business is or what industry you're in, so we can get to know each other. And Judge Todd will be looking at some of those answers, and she may even be able to give you some pointed advice today. So thanks so much for being here. We will get started shortly. Hello, everybody. I just want to say a quick welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We'll give it just a couple minutes and let some other folks join us. Head over to the chat, though. Let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know what your business is or what you're thinking of getting into, what industry you work in. I know I see a few fellow attorneys in the audience, so thanks for joining us today. We have a great program with Judge Todd, and we will get started shortly. All right. Hello, everybody. I think it's time. I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions today. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is put on by the Military Spouse JD Network. My name is Kristen Jones. I'm the immediate past president of MSJDN. And MSJDN is a bar association for lawyers who happen to be married to service members. So we're an exciting little niche group. We've got tremendous experience, lots of intelligence, lots of good ideas, and we're really excited to share this with the community. Today's webinar is designed for small business owners. Some of you are veterans, some of you are military spouses, some of you have no military connection, and this is for every one of you. The program today is funded through a really generous grant from the Small Business Administration, and it is being administered by Syracuse University and the Institute for Veterans and Military Families. If you're not familiar, check out IVMF online. They're a tremendous organization, and they also have a lot of resources available for you as a small business owner. In addition to today's webinar and the other webinars in the series, IVMF has partnered with a lot of other organizations around the country to bring you information, resources, counseling, coaching, financial support, anything you can think of as a business owner. So check out the IVMF website. We'll give that to you in the slides. And also look up your local SBA office or your local small business development center. You're not alone when you hang out that shingle and start a business. So what we're going to do today is really talk you through kind of a checklist. now that you have a business, what are the next steps you need to take and things you need to think about? And equally important, what do you not need to think about? What does not apply to you so you can move on and focus on bigger and better things? Our presenter today is really amazing. Her name is Judge Ebony Todd, and she's a graduate of Baylor University and Texas Wesleyan School of Law. She's a veteran of the U.S. Army, where she served as a judge advocate general in Okinawa in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And after she honorably retired in 2017, Judge Todd founded a law firm in Texas, which is owned and operated by her and another female attorney. It's called Jackson, Todd and Lambert. So that firm is currently the Bell County Bar Association Pro Bono Law Firm of the Year. It's really important to them to give back, and we're thrilled to have her today doing just that. She also has received a Small Business of the Year award, and that's going to be handed out next month, so that's exciting. She is a small business owner herself and loves to advise small businesses. In February 2020, Judge Todd was appointed as the first African-American judge in Nolanville, Texas, and she serves there still as an associate or alternate municipal court judge. And she was recently honored by the Military Spouse JD Network with an Exceptional Service Award because of her involvement in the community. She has also been recognized as a Texas Woman of Distinction by Alpha Delta Kappa, and Judge Todd was appointed by Governor Greg Abbott as a board member of the Texas Board of Chiropractor Examiners and the Texas Medical Board. She also serves on the board of Greater Killeen Community Clinic as a vice chair, and she served as the chair of the Killeen Heights Satellite Club of Rotary International. She has co-founded a resource for mental and emotional well-being for professional women, and that's called We Cover Down. Her business partner and she are also publishing a book in December, and the book is geared towards mompreneurs. It's called Capital Moms, Mothers Who Start and Run Businesses. So just adding another layer to all of those difficulties you face as a new business owner. She's also contributed writing to the newspaper Voices United, and she has been featured in Texas Appeal magazine. Believe it or not, in between all of those meetings, she likes to write poetry, travel, and sing karaoke. And Judge Todd and her husband, Captain James Todd, are the proud parents of 3 children, James, Jet, and 7. So Judge Todd, we are just thrilled to have you here today. We appreciate your time and your expertise, and we're going to hand the program over. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very thoughtful introduction. Thank you for telling my bio. I always feel a little odd when people are talking about me as I sit and listen, but I'm grateful to you, Ms. Kristen. I think we have a couple of slides before we get to my first slide. Is there a slide for MSJDN next? There we go. Kristen, did you want to say anything about that slide before we got started, or are we good to go?
I think we're good to go, Ebony. I would just add, everybody look for that website on the bottom of your screen, because that's going to be where you find all the resources that you need. And you'll also get a follow-up email from today with a lot of additional info.
Fantastic. That website will be throughout our screen. You all already have heard my bio, but I did want to point out this beautiful picture of my beautiful family, which includes my business partner, Shania Lambert, who is the other half of Jackson, Todd, and Lambert there with her son, Aiden. We are all a huge family. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, as an attorney, I got to give my disclaimer. I know there's a lot of attorneys out there, so you can feel me. I am an attorney, but this is not legal advice. What I really want to do today, if we can go to the next slide, my intent today is to inform you, to make you aware and give you some direction. We want to, as an organization, develop essential knowledge for our business owners. And so everything that you get today should do one of those 3 things. Let's do a poll real quick. I want to know who I'm speaking to. So this poll is just going to ask you how long you've been in business. And don't forget, Kristen told us earlier, please put in the chat where you're from and what industry you're in as well. We want to hear from you. So how long have you been in business? You can either put, I haven't started yet, I've been in business less than a year, I've been in business 1 to 5 years, or I've been in business over 5 years. It'll be really helpful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Jacksonville, Florida's here. Boston, fantastic. Kentucky, I was stationed at Fort Campbell. Realtor in Harker Heights, thank you. Yes, Miss McCoy, thank you so much for coming in. I know Miss McCoy very personally well. Okay, so y'all keep putting it in the chat. We're gonna go to the next slide. Miss Mary, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, we got the results up. If you can see it as I can see it on my screen, most of the people here haven't started a business yet. That's fantastic. Well, congratulations on even thinking enough to invest in yourself today by being here at this webinar. I want you to know that I've invested in you today as well. In fact, I'm wearing perfume and you can't even smell me. And I'm wearing the good stuff too. I didn't put my cheap stuff on because I knew today was going to be a valuable investment into you, that I even wore heels. So the three things that I want to talk about today are asset protection, agreements, and alternative dispute resolution. We can go to the next slide. Let's start with asset protection. The definition that I want to present to you is that it's a strategy to protect whatever belongs to you from other creditors. We want to keep your personal assets from being touched or taken from creditors or people that you owe money to as a result of litigation even. Next slide, please. Within asset protection, I'm going to go through these 6 categories or 6 subjects and let you know how I believe that these 6 things could potentially help you protect your assets. Let's start with business type. Next slide. With business type, this slide can look a little bit convoluted. Many people have heard about LLCs, limited liability companies. Many people have heard about corporations. What I wanted to present to you all as business owners and as future business owners, that it's good for you to be informed about the differences between a business type within your state and the federal business structure that you have with the IRS. Sometimes it gets convoluted and people use the terms interchangeably. So I'm hoping to give you a little bit of perspective here today. As you can see on the slide, within the state, we can have a sole proprietorship. And I didn't put this on the slide, but you can have a partnership, which is essentially a sole proprietorship with partners. So multiple people start a business, or if you're a sole proprietor, you start a business without going to the state and formally forming the business. Not going to spend a lot of time on sole proprietorship, but I want you to know that that is a type of business, as well as an LLC, a limited liability company. I wanted to give you a little bit of extra on LLCs because some people don't realize that there are different types of limited liability companies. The professional limited liability company is sometimes referred to as a PLLC. That's what my company has. What that means is that the people who own the company must have some sort of license, a state license that governs them. So accountant, or if you're a nurse practitioner or something that requires you to be licensed in your state, you can have a professional limited liability company. A Series LLC is kind of like a parent company with several different companies underneath it. A lot of real estate investors are starting to use Series LLCs in order to protect the assets of each company. So you can put a property in LLC A, a property in LLC B, a property in LLC C, and presumably those assets, those properties will remain separate in the event that you are sued or a creditor comes after you and or one of the properties. So that means that if somebody comes after LLC C, that property, they should not be able to touch LLC B or LLC A under a series. Finally, a corporation is when you have multiple shareholders. Normally, this structure is going to be good. This entity will be good for someone who wants to have multiple shareholders and investments. They want to be able to sell their shares. Let's talk about the tax treatment. Under the IRS, you can have, we use pass-through taxation for sole proprietors and LLCs. What that means is that whatever income is given to your company, you put on your personal taxes. So if your company makes $10,000, it doesn't matter if you spent $15,000 on the company that year, you're going to put the entire $10,000 on your taxes. Now, a point that I really want to hit home today is that as a LLC, you can elect a different tax structure, which is called an S corporation. So you see pass-through and you see corporation under tax treatment. There is S corporation and there is C corporation. We're going to talk a little bit more about it in a second. I want you to take this poll. Have you formed a business entity? Tell us if you already have one. You're going to answer if you're a sole proprietor, an LLC, a corporation, or you have some other business entity. Now, of course, those of you that don't have a business at all, we should have put, no, I don't have a business at all. But put sole proprietor for that if you haven't formed a business. Thank you so much. All right, most of everyone is a sole proprietor or not in business yet. And then we have 33% an LLC and 20% a corporation. Fantastic. Put inside the chat if your corporation has shareholders or if you are a sole owner of a corporation. I want to know what type of corporation you have. Next slide, please. Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, we got an S corporation. Fantastic. Sole owner of a LLC. Fantastic. Okay, great. I'm going to try to make sure that this webinar is addressing some of your particular needs. Okay, in order to protect your assets, and we're talking about business assets versus personal assets. In order to protect your specific assets, we're going to need to separate you from the business. I wanted to point out 5 great ways that you can separate yourself from the business. That means that you're making it clear to a third party that you are in fact not the same as the business. When you're a sole proprietor, you are one in the same. Your business, if you are selling seasonings, your business of seasoning, selling seasonings is you. So if somebody sues you for those seasonings, they have access to your personal assets. But if you have an LLC or a corporation, or there are a plethora of other business entities that we're not going to talk about today, but if you have another company, this is what I want you to do. 1, I want you to have a company or operating agreement. This may feel so weird when you are the only member, but it is very important that you keep your business separate by showing that you have an agreement between yourself as the member or the owner and your business. That company operating agreement, if you're a corporation, it'll be referenced as the bylaws, is going to go through who's responsible for what, where records are going to be stored, who is the registered agent, and so on and so forth. We really want to have that agreement tight. Number 2, you're going to have a business bank account. This seems elementary for some, but for many, they will start a business and not open a separate business account. If you have an LLC or a corporation or any such different entity other than a sole proprietorship, you should have a separate bank account for it. Note here for all you sole proprietors, consider opening up a different bank account for your business still. You don't have to have a bank account that says this is for this business, but it'll make it much easier for you for accounting purposes and record keeping purposes if you go to a different bank and start a new checking account. Meeting minutes. This again might feel super weird for someone who's the sole member to write down meeting minutes. Well, myself said yes. That is exactly what I want you to do. So if you have a meeting every Monday or every third of the month, say you sit down and you just type out notes of your goals for the next month and the things that you have accomplished in the last month. Write them out and consider those meeting minutes. This is a way that you would be able to show a court if it came up. I am separate and apart from my business. Resolutions are very similar. Resolutions are where you are essentially saying, I have made this decision for my company, and you put it in a resolution. It has some whereas language, and it may be unique to you. You can find a template pretty easily, but what I want you to do is to have resolutions for important tasks, such as if you agree to sign a lease. If you have a new bank account that you want to open, go ahead and put it in a resolution. And leasing agreements. I want you to know that whenever you have a property, equipment, whenever you're using an equipment or a vehicle just for your business, have a leasing agreement between yourself and your business for that property and equipment. That shows that you are, in fact, separate from your business. You're doing business with your business. Okay, business, you can use my vehicle for $200 a month. And this is a rent-to-own agreement. And at the end of 5 years, you can own this vehicle. And in the event something happens before then, you can pay an upfront cost of $5,000 or what have you. Make an agreement with yourself to make sure, with your business, excuse me, to make sure that the business is leasing whatever it is that you have. Okay, let's go to the next slide. For tax treatment, I talked a little bit about S corporation and C corporation earlier. What I wanted you to know here is for federal tax treatment, pass through, I've already said, goes through the business to you on your personal taxes. S corporation means that you're electing to have the business separated, legally separated from you personally. And so the business might have some taxes and you will still have taxes for the income that comes to you. However, you're not being double taxed. And C corporations are double taxed. That means the money that comes to the corporation is taxed when it comes to the corporation, and then whatever is distributed from the corporation to the shareholders is taxed again. So you may be thinking, why on earth would anybody choose C corporation status? And that would be a great question. And the reason is, if you're intending to have investors, you should have a C corporation. If you're intending to have more than 100 shareholders, you should have a C corporation, because those are things that can happen with C corporation that cannot happen with S corporation and pass through. And when I say investors, I mean people investing to receive shares, not just giving you money or giving you some sort of loan or something like that. All right. Let's go to the, I'm sorry, before we go to the next slide, let's have a poll real quick. Have you elected S corporation status? So if you're an LLC or a corporation, please let us know now. Have you elected S corporation status? And if you don't have a business, put NA for us. Select NA. Can we go to the next slide while that's up? Awesome. While you're doing that, I want to reveal to you that if you have questions about business type, I want you to speak to a business attorney. Great thing about MSJDN is that they are offering, through a program that is fully funded, they're offering free 1-hour consultations. So if you want to consult with a business attorney, I want to encourage you to visit the MSJDN website. All right, some people said in the poll that they didn't know about the election. So I hope that you learned something about S corporation today. I do want you to know and I almost forgot to tell you. So S corporation status is very beneficial for some because of some tax benefits. If you want to talk to someone about it, you're going to talk to a tax professional like I have here at the bottom of this slide. Or you're going to want to visit the irs.gov website to learn more about the election. If you want more information about business type in your state, visit your Secretary of State's office. Can you remove that poll for me so I can see that? Thank you. So the Secretary of State's office is going to give you more information about the different types of entities that are available for your state, because there are numerous. Now, their websites are normally comprehensive and going to give you all of that information, but the SBA's website also includes information about business structures that I want to encourage you to visit as well, if you haven't started a business yet and you're still thinking about what type of business to start. Next slide, please. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ms. Savage. Yes, we're going to put these slides. We're going to send all these slides to you all. Okay, so intellectual property is another way that you can protect your assets, protect your thoughts is what I like to say. So intellectual property are trademark, trade secret, copyright, and patent. Many of you probably have heard about trademarks, right? So we know you can trademark a slogan, Coca-Cola is trademarked, Nike is trademarked, but what I want you to know is that if you do not register a trademark, it doesn't mean that you may not own a trademark. You can still have a common law trademark by simply putting capital T and capital M at the right side of your slogan or name or logo, whatever it is that you're trying to trademark. So sometimes we put it at the very top as far like superscript, or some people subscript it. That doesn't matter. But capital T, capital M creates a common law trademark for you where you don't have to register it. But I do not want to oversimplify it as if you should not register your trademark. I always advocate for registered trademarks. In the interim, put that T and that N. Whatever is your intellectual property that you're concerned, like, this is my baby and I don't want anybody else to use it, go ahead and trademark it. But there are times when you don't need to trademark, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, because you're going to have a wonderful intellectual property attorney that's going to speak on intellectual property and branding. But I want you to know that everybody doesn't need to trademark. Trade secrets. Trade secrets are just what they say, secrets. The most infamous trade secret that I am aware of is Coca-Cola's recipe. Now, Coca-Cola's recipe, if you ever visit their museum in Atlanta, you know that they do not play, as my mom would say. So they have every intention of suing the socks off of anybody who releases their trade secret of their recipe. If you have something like that, keep it under wraps, keep it confidential, make sure you have some sort of NDA or confidentiality agreement, which we'll talk about, and make sure that it is only given on an as needed basis. A copyright can be done for artistic measures. If you create dance or paintings or a website, you can copyright it. A patent is normally for design. And I would like to bring up that there's sometimes patents for things such as recipes. It's very difficult to have a patent for recipes. However, if you have a very unique recipe, consider speaking with a patent attorney about it. All right, let's do another poll. Does anyone on this webinar own an intellectual property? Who owns one? Yes or no? We can go to the next slide while they do that. Fantastic. If you have questions about intellectual property, I want to encourage you to speak with an intellectual property attorney. I want you to know that patent attorneys are specialized. So if you want a patent, you're going to want to speak with a patent attorney. All right, most people here do not own intellectual property, but we have a few that do. Okay, so awesome. If you want more information about patents or trademarks, you can visit the uspto.gov website. And I didn't put the copyright website up, but copyright.gov is used for copyrights. And then Secretary of State's office is listed here, because if you're in a state like Texas, you may receive an intellectual property for the geographical area of your state. So in Texas, we can have Texas trademarks. That means that anyone in Texas can say, I want to trademark this just for the boundaries of Texas. If you go outside of Texas and use it, that's fine, but don't use it here. Not many people are using it now, but I feel like USPTO.gov's website is so easy to use that it makes more sense to just go ahead and cover the country if you can. But I do have an argument against that. I don't want to go in the weeds. So, so I won't do that. But so let's put on the next slide. If you have more questions about intellectual property, which I'm sure you should, I want to plug in Claire Gibson right now. She is a wonderful intellectual property attorney, and I'm sure she's going to give a fantastic presentation about intellectual property on October 4th. I want to encourage you all to be there. I plan to be there, so I hope to see you there. Next slide, please. All right, another way that you can protect your assets is through insurance. I've listed 8 insurances here. I'm just going to go through them fairly quickly. You can have insurance for your commercial property. I want to point out that that can be equipment, not just buildings. You can have insurance for professional liability. That includes errors and omissions. So we want to make sure that normally this is for someone who gives like advice. So if you're a coach or consultant, you may want to consider errors and omissions. You want to get, or an advisor, if you're an advisor, you may want to consider that. You want to consider insurance for business income. So business income insurance is in the event something happens and you lose business income as a result of what happened, that's within the purview of your insurance contract, then you would be able to receive income. And I've heard about this happening multiple times. In fact, there is a cousin of my husband whose restaurant was ran into by someone eating her food outside of the restaurant. So they just drove into her restaurant. And unfortunately, that driver did not have insurance, but they had chicken. And, I wished that my husband's cousin, our cousin, had business income insurance because she missed out on customers and clients and income while waiting for the damages to be cured. So business income insurance is something to consider. Data breach, we are an internet age. So we all should be considering whether or not data breach insurance is something we should invest in. General liability is for general liability for anything that you do while you're at work. But again, it's within the purview of the insurance that you have, the insurance contract. Workers' compensation. Some states require you to have workers' compensation insurance. That covers if a worker is hurt while on the job, and you don't want a worker to sue your business and end up owning it. No, that doesn't normally happen. I'm joking. But the point is, in Texas, workers' compensation is not mandatory, and it can end up biting someone behind. And then commercial umbrella, it just means that you're taking care of, just in case you've done general liability, you have general liability for $100,000, but end up being responsible for $150,000. Commercial umbrella will handle the other $50,000. And then commercial auto is what it says it's for. It's for your vehicles that are used for business. Next slide. If you want to ask more questions about insurance, I put here, notice I use the word trusted. I want to tell you why I use that, because when I'm looking for an insurance agent from now on, I will always look for one that's like my insurance agent. I love my insurance agent, but she is embedded in our community wholly. So she has every reason to ensure that I am properly taken care of. I've heard so many times horror stories about people who didn't have enough insurance or didn't have the right insurance or what have you. And I can't help but to think, why didn't my insurer or your insurance agent tell you to do more, have more? Why did they just give you the basics? And so I put trusted here because I want you to make sure that you speak with an insurance agent that has a dog in the fight, that's going to make sure that you are fully covered because they don't want you to talk bad about them around the community. And I'm not saying manipulate people. What I'm saying is that if somebody has a trusted reputation in the community, they are more likely to make sure you are fully covered. Next slide. Okay, I'm just going to give a point here. I have read about that retirement accounts, some of them, not all of them, can be protected from liabilities, so from creditors. So if you develop a retirement account as a small business owner, this might help you protect assets. So I just listed some types of retirement accounts here. I'm not going to go through them, but I wanted you to be aware of it, and that's why I put the flashlight. Next slide, please. If you have more questions about retirement accounts, you're going to want to see a financial advisor. Of course, trusted is always great, but just a financial advisor for sure. Next slide, please. All right, another way that we can protect our assets is through business succession planning. I want you to ask yourself a few questions. But before you do that, I want you to know that business succession planning is not for everyone. I gave an example earlier about selling seasonings. If you sell seasonings, you're probably the talent, you're the go-to, you do everything in the company right now. If you're just starting out, you don't necessarily need a business succession plan. However, if you have employees and you intend for this company to be your legacy, if you have a lot of assets in the company and there are quite a few owners of the company, you may want to consider a business succession plan. 3 questions you can ask yourself is, who will manage or own all the things? Where are all the passwords and things? And when do you want the things passed to who's next? Answer these questions in a business succession plan. So when you create a business plan, you know, it's normally in the beginning. A business succession plan should be created an ongoing living document once you've already started running your company and started filling out who would do great at what and who should own whatever. I recently found out that there's a business owner that I knew out of Round Rock who passed away earlier this year. And his company is still going on, but they had a period of time where they didn't know if they were going to make it because he was the only person with the passwords and he was the only person with access to some very important information for them to be able to operate. And in that moment, I realized we need to have more business succession planning, especially when we have employees who are depending on us to make income. Next slide, please. So business succession plan, you do not have to hire an attorney to create a business succession plan. However, if you do it yourself, consider notarizing it, something that can make it feel a little bit more official. Because if for some reason somebody is told, no, we're not doing that, you're not going to be able to use that plan to suggest that you're going to be the next manager, then they can probably use that in court, or it's something that I would want them to be able to use in court to suggest, this is why I'm manager and this person isn't allowing me to be manager. You can always use a business attorney for something like a business succession plan, and I definitely recommend it, but it's not required. Next slide, please. Agreements. I wanted to tell you that agreements is our next subject after asset protection. So we've talked about asset protections, and now we're going to talk about agreements. Agreements can be a way to protect your assets as well, but the definition I'm using today is that it's an enforceable meeting of the minds. What we're going to mostly talk about are meetings of the minds that are put in writing. However, I want you to know that there's states like Texas, those meetings of the minds can be oral agreements. They are not required to be in writing, but we're going to namely talk about in writing. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about some types of agreements, key ingredients, written agreement necessary, and resolving disputes. Next slide, please. So some types of agreements that I want you to be aware of. If you are in partnership with anybody, regardless if you're a regular general partnership or you're a limited liability partnership or a limited liability company or what have you. You can have an agreement between the parties, the owners, that says this is the type of partnership we have. You're responsible for this, I'm responsible for that. I want y'all to know that I am in a couple of partnerships, and my partnership with my law partner, I cannot stand trust accounts. So our partnership agreement is you handle the trust account and I handle the bills of the company. So, you know, internet, leasing agreement, all of that I handle. So we have that agreement that this is what we will do for the company. How that is different for the company operating agreement, I put slash because in Texas we use it for the same, it means the same thing, a company or an operating agreement, or bylaws if you're talking about a corporation or a nonprofit corporation. So those agreements are different because that agreement is between the owner or the members or the directors and that company. So the partnership agreement is between the members or the owners. The company operating agreement or bylaws is between the members and the owners and the company. So that's the difference. Then a lease agreement, I talked to you a little bit earlier about leasing between you and the company. That's an agreement I want you to be aware of. A license agreement. Remember earlier I talked to you about intellectual property. I wanted to bring up license agreement today because we have a lot of people there are a lot of people who have the mindset, if someone uses my trademarked slogan, I'm suing them. Or I'm sending them a cease and desist letter and suing them. I want to propose to you all that maybe instead you should, when you get your intellectual property, consider having a license agreement drafted, because then you can send that license agreement to them and say, hey, I hear that you're using my intellectual property, and I'm so glad that you like it. I do too. No, you don't have to add that part. But you say in that letter that I have a license agreement. This is how much it costs for you to use my intellectual property. I look forward to hearing back from you. So have a license agreement to protect that intellectual property. Think strategically and not defensively or litigiously every time someone uses your intellectual property. All right, and then pre/post nuptial agreement. That agreement is also able to be used to protect your assets. I wanted you to be aware of that agreement so you can say, I'm married and I'm starting a business. What happens if I get a divorce? I hate even talking about divorce because God knows I don't want one, and I don't want anybody that I love to have one. I don't want anybody I hate to have one. I don't hate anybody. But the point is, you need to consider what happens in the event you have a divorce as much as you consider what happens in the event I die. All right, next slide. Some key ingredients of written agreements are as follows. So I put here indemnity. I want everyone to know what that means, because believe it or not, it's in a lot of our agreements, especially when you have agreements with major corporations. Like if you have any accounts on certain websites, when they have that terms of use and you don't read it, but you agree to it, many times they may have an indemnity clause that lets them allows them to recoup from you any attorney fees or any such liability that they have as a result of actions that you take while using their website or their products. So indemnity clause means that you're basically reimbursing someone if you're sued. The example I'll give today is, say, for instance, you have an employee. Okay, I know that there's a real estate investor on here, so our real estate, a realtor. So say, for instance, you're a realtor and you become a broker, and then you have realtors underneath you. And so there is a realtor who goes to show a home to a potential customer, and they end up getting into a fight, a physical altercation. that customer is likely going to sue the company, the real estate broker's company, right? And in that case, you may have an indemnity clause or agreement with your employee or the realtor that says, when I'm sued because of actions that you made that were separate and apart from what I've told you to do as an employee, you're going to pay me back for that. So that's what an indemnity clause does. NDA versus confidentiality. What I want you to take from that today is that non-disclosure agreements, which is what NDA stands for, non-disclosure agreements, are different from confidentiality agreements in that NDAs, you're telling a person, you are not allowed to disclose this information. I can, but you cannot. Confidentiality is we are keeping this secret. I'm putting that in a nutshell, and that, you know, some attorneys may disagree with me, but that's in a nutshell, in my opinion, how I differentiate between when I want to use NDA versus confidentiality agreement. Non-compete. Non-compete is used, we can use that in several different ways, but if you're going to fully invest in like an employee or independent contractor or someone else, period, if you're going to invest in them, maybe training, or you're going to give them a lot of your resources, consider having them sign a non-compete that they won't compete in your general area. Now, there are some factors that must be included in every non-compete. We're not going to go through them all today. If you need to know them, you can always reach out to an attorney, a business attorney, to ask more about that. A waiver. If you're doing anything risky, have a waiver. So I just went skydiving for the first time with my mom for her birthday, the only time I'm ever going to do it. Like, I'm never doing it. However, I signed a waiver. And when I tell you guys, I did not want to sign that waiver. I was thinking, oh my God, if I die, my family can't sue them. Yeah, like I signed a waiver, but that was smart of them to have a waiver. I'll talk to you a little bit more about who should have a waiver in a bit, but venue, let's move on to venue. Venue, you're saying this is where we're going to have litigation if we have litigation. This is where. So that clause is important because nowadays we're all over the internet. We're selling products to China, China's selling products to Russia, Russia's selling products to Japan, and Japan selling them back to us. And that's fine. However, we want to know that there's some sort of agreement, especially amongst some Americans. It's harder to do when it's international, but some sort of agreement that says, if you're going to sue me, this is the place you're going to sue me at. You can limit the scope of where they can sue you. Arbitration clause is for disputes. So arbitration clause is a beautiful thing to have if you want to make disputes less costly, less time consuming, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in a bit, but not for everyone. And then acts of God is another ingredient that you can include. That is when you're saying, hey, in the event an act of God occurs, we're going to terminate this contract, or, you know, one or both of us does not have to do what this contract says to do. And nowadays, normally the acts of God were weather related, but that also includes a pandemic now. So you should put in language like that. Next slide, please. So when is a written agreement necessary versus not necessary? Whew, I know this is a lot of information, you guys. I hope that I've been able to give it to you in a way that is edible, that you're able to eat this and enjoy it. But I wanted to give you just a couple of bits more. Eat a little bit more with me, okay? So with this written agreement, if you have a written agreement, whether or not you think it's necessary, let's talk about that. For a customer, naturally, I'm an attorney. You may be thinking, of course, the attorney is going to tell us to have a written agreement. Actually, I'm not. There are times when a written agreement is not necessary. Let me give you an example. If you're a nail technician, you probably don't need to have someone sign an agreement before you do their nails. But if you're an esthetician and you are putting chemicals on the faces of people, you should have a written agreement and potentially a waiver, right, in your agreement that protects you. Another example would be if you're selling cookies or cakes or cupcakes at a bakery, you may not need a written agreement when someone buys a cookie from you. But if you are a baker that sells wedding cakes or you cater, you absolutely should have a written agreement with your customers. I hope that makes some sense. You don't always need a written agreement. Employees, similarly, I don't believe you always need a written agreement. And I'll tell you why. In the state of Texas, we're an employee at will state. What that means is that I can fire my employees for whatever I choose to fire them for, as long as it's not a protected reason. So let me give you an example. I can be fired from my employer for wearing polka dots and using Apple products. Yes, that is a thing in Texas. We don't care. However, I cannot be fired for being Black, for being a female, or for being a Christian. That is not a thing. It's not okay. You cannot do that, and you could be subject to liability. So because you have this protection as an employer to be able to fire for any unprotected reason, like the polka dots and Apple products reason, which was very lame, but the point is it's outside of the protected reasons. You don't want to limit yourself to the constructs of a contract. If you put in an agreement, this is what you're going to do as my employee, you could potentially subject yourself to liability if you fire that employee, as long as they have done everything in that contract. So what does that mean? You put in a contract that you have to answer the phones and check the mail, and then they answer the phones and check the mail, but they're lazy about it. And then you fire them, they could potentially come after you or sue you because they're like, hey, I answered the phones and checked the mail. Because you had an agreement, it could restrict you unnecessarily. Something to consider, but remember, this is not legal advice, and I want you to speak to your own attorney about whether or not it's good for you to have an employee agreement. I will point out here that employee handbooks are fantastic to have, and you should have them signed and state that they have read the employee handbook and they understand the policies in such. You can include in the employee handbook an arbitration clause, like what we talked about earlier. Finally, independent contractor, always have an agreement, a written one. All right, next slide, please. Resolving disputes. I'm going to give you a few steps or things that you can do if for some reason you find yourself in a dispute. Put it in writing, first of all. We're talking about agreements, but sometimes we agree without putting things in writing. I know we all do it. We all do it. So you put it in writing, and remember that emails and texts count. They can be counted as admissions in court. We want them. So somebody has a dispute with you and you know for a fact that they are wrong, and maybe you don't have it in a written agreement, send a text that's like, I thought you said X. And they're like, yes, I said that, but now I don't want to do that anymore. And it's like, thank you for putting this in a text. I'm going to use this against you in court. It feels so weird to laugh by myself, by the way, but it's fine. Okay, demand letter. You can use a demand letter from yourself first. If you face a dispute, you send them a letter that says, hey, you said you were going to do X, you did Y. If you don't do X, I'm going to sue you, and do X by Z date. That's a demand letter from you. Then if they don't do it, consider hiring an attorney to send a demand letter. You can also consider filing a claim in small claims court, which you don't normally need an attorney for, but the jurisdiction depends on how much the claim is for. So you can go to small claims court here in Killeen for claims up to, I believe it's now $20,000. They recently changed it because courts got behind in Bell County. So if you have a claim up to $20,000, you can go to small claims court on your own without an attorney. You can go to court without an attorney anyway, but small claims court is a lot less informal, and it doesn't feel as restrictive. Another idea I have for you, if you want to resolve a dispute, If someone's doing something illegal, like they stole your money, I'm hearing that a lot. People are getting scammed, y'all. A lot of scammers are out there. If you have their personal information, you can use it to report them to a federal or state agency that is relevant to your matters. So it depends on what it is, but consider speaking with a business attorney about what agency you should report them to. And finally, court or alternative dispute resolution, which we'll talk about very briefly here in a minute. Next slide. If you have questions about agreements, speak with a contract attorney or a business attorney. Next slide. I also want to put in a plug right here that MSJDN is going to continue to give you fantastic webinars. I'm just claiming that. Rachel Brinke is a fantastic business strategist and attorney, and she is going to be offering us a webinar here soon. I don't have a date to give you, but I wanted to plug her in because she has a wealth of knowledge that I am looking forward to her sharing. So she's going to talk to us about agreements, contracts soon. Next slide, please. All right, and finally, our last subject of today is alternative dispute resolution. We are going to talk about advantages, disadvantages, and types of ADR for short, alternative dispute resolutions. Next slide. Okay, the advantages to them are normally the cost. It's normally cheaper. There's normally an expert involved if it's arbitration, and it's normally efficient, meaning it's a faster process. I did not mention this before, but an alternative dispute resolution is just what the name denotes. It's alternative to going to court. So instead of going to court, you can use a different type of resolution, and I'll name them in a few, but costs, expert, and efficiency are some of the advantages to them. Next slide, please. Disadvantage may be that there's an agreement required. You cannot force anyone to succumb to ADR. Both parties must agree to ADR. Sometimes there's a power imbalance, meaning that if you're going up against a huge company, it can give them what seemingly is an advantage against a small company or someone who doesn't have an attorney. Whereas in court systems, the judge has the duty of making sure there is no power imbalance and rights are being maintained and respected and honored. And then there's no guarantee to ADRs. So it could end up costly if you all don't agree or it's a non-binding agreement, and then you end up still going to court and trying to solve the dispute. Now, there are ways that you can put language in your agreements that says arbitration and it ends with arbitration, and you can put language in there to make sure your ADR is as binding as possible, but there are no guarantees with ADRs. Next slide, please. Types of ADR: negotiation, mediation, conciliation, and arbitration. I want you to know that negotiation is essentially when two parties are coming together to try to negotiate an agreement. Whereas mediation is when there's two parties, or it could be more, but normally it's two parties, and then there's a neutral third party that mediates an agreement, hopefully, between the two parties. Conciliation is sort of like mediation, where there's a neutral third party, but that party is called a facilitator, and their point is to reconcile the two parties. So sometimes it might be ex-spouses or parents, or it might be two business owners that they are owners of the same business, and a conciliation would aim to reconcile them as business owners. And finally, arbitration is a lot closer to court, but it's still informal, and the arbitrator or arbiter, depends on where you're from, on what they call them. But the person who makes the final decision is an expert in whatever field that concerns the arbitration. So say, for instance, you have a business I am looking for the different types of businesses. I don't see a lot of types of businesses. I'm sorry, y'all. So, a mobile notary. So say, for instance, you're a mobile notary and you're suing somebody for you have an arbitration dealing with notaries, another notary business. Then in an arbitration, you can have an expert who is an expert about notaries. I think it's wonderful. So arbitration is a wonderful alternative in my mind to court, because sometimes the court may not know much about the subject, and definitely juries don't normally know much about the subject, but arbitrators do. So there's a lot of advantages to having an arbitration. All right, next slide. If you have more questions about ADRs, you're going to speak to a business attorney. Next slide, please. I want to thank you all so very much for putting up with me for this long, and also for registering, for being here today. And I especially want to thank MSJDN for seeing enough in little old me to say, we want you to start out this webinar series. So thank you so much. I want to do one last poll. If you're interested in a free 1-hour consultation, please answer the question here on the poll. We want to know what interest there is in having more consultations from business attorneys. Thank you again. Thank you, Ms. Kristen.
Well, thank you so much, Judge Todd. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A. And what I'm going to do in the meantime is put some information on the screen. So this is Judge Todd's contact information. But as she mentioned, MSJDN has some money to give away. So what we would like to do is pay for her time to talk to you. So if you're in Texas, we can connect you with Judge Todd for a consultation. If you're in 4 other states, we have other attorneys standing by, and we would love to schedule you a consultation. So someone asked in the chat, what is this grant you're talking about? So the Small Business Administration realizes that a lot of small businesses were hit hard during COVID, and they're really looking for ways to get into your community and to talk to you about what resources they can provide. So MSJDN has received a grant under this program. Our grant is administered by Syracuse University. So we are covering these geographical areas. It's a little narrow, but if you're in a different place, there are resources out there for you. So visit the MSJDN website if you're in Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Texas, or Washington, D.C. And if you're in any other place, do not despair. Look in the right column on your screen. There's tons of resources out there. And there's also, if you go directly to the SBA website, they have a locator. Put in your zip code and the SBA will tell you what they have in your neighborhood. And I'm here to tell you, a lot of these organizations just got a lot of money to help you out. So make the phone call. Do not hesitate if you have been waiting to look around and kind of shop for resources, because I'm telling you, all of a sudden they're out there and we are looking for you. So look at these websites, look at the SBA website, and find out what we can do to help you. So let me throw out a couple of questions. If you're able to stick around, we would love to give you more info. If you need to drop off, we get it. But look at those websites, look for the email follow-up we're going to send you, because we've got a lot of great stuff to give you, and just keep the ball rolling, give you those other resources. So Judge Todd, one of the great questions I saw in the chat was, are those protected classes, when you were talking about employment, are the protected classes for employment the same as for fair housing? For example, race, religion, gender, national origin, and disability? Oh, you are muted, ma'am. Thank you.
That's a fantastic question. As far as I know, they do coincide. Disability may not be considered protected in the same way. It depends. But for the most part, you should not discriminate based upon disability as well. But we know that there are some disabilities that would stop someone from doing certain employment. Everybody can't be a construction worker. So other than that, for the most part, yes.
And I know we're going to see differences state to state as well. So that's another great thing to write down on your checklist and ask someone local what they can tell you if you have any particular concerns there. Another really good question we had is about licensing. If you're licensed to practice your profession in one state, but you're taking contract work in a different state, and this comes from a lawyer, the contract deliverables are not in themselves legal services or legal advice or work product. But what should she be thinking through? What concerns should she research?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question as well. I would want to make sure that tax-wise, that the state that she's receiving contracts from isn't expecting taxes for the income that she receives from that individual or that business. So tax-wise, I would double check on that. But because everything, it depends, and I hate that answer, but it really does depend. But I would look into taxes. I would also look into whether or not, if you're going to be, you said, well, you didn't say you would be, so I'm not going to answer that as well. I will say that I would focus on taxes, and I would also make sure you cover yourself in your agreement with them to say, this, I'm licensed in Texas. This agreement between us is governed by the laws of Texas. So make sure your agreement says what state you're in and where you're licensed, and maybe add in a disclaimer that even if you're not in this state, it is not my intent to practice the laws of another state other than this state. So I would put some, this isn't legal advice though, but I would put some language, have some language in your agreements, and ensure there's no tax implications. That's my final answer.
Final answer. I like it. Well, thank you again, Judge Todd, and thank you everybody for joining us today. As we mentioned, October 4, we have everything you need to know to protect your brand. Those trademarks, copyrights, the name of your company, your recipes, your artwork. All of that is going to be covered by another great military spouse attorney, Claire Gibson. And then in November, we're going to have a deep dive as far as those contracts and agreements. We've heard from a lot of small business owners that gets confusing. When do I need them? When do I not? What do I put in them? And should I just Google it, or should I find something a little more detailed? And so I appreciate, Judge Todd, that you told us that sometimes you don't have to make things complicated. Sometimes you do. So we're going to continue that theme and give you more sort of detailed, granular information on agreements. So keep in touch, visit the websites. We're going to email you again when we have more information about another upcoming event. And we're also going to send you a follow-up email today, tomorrow, the next few days. So you have these slides, so you have contact information, and so that you have resources. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for the lovely comments. Thank you for interacting with us. And Judge Todd, thank you for your energy. I hope that is being infused into all of these businesses as we take the next steps and strengthen the businesses. So
thank you for this opportunity. I can't stop thanking you enough, Kristen. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we're going to sign off.
Bye, everyone.